Well, hello. My name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 25th day of December 2022, and we're going to continue another short snippet from the Redemption Manual 4.5 to deal with how we free ourselves from how we put ourselves in bondage. And so, what we're going to do is go on here with the Redemption Manual 4.5, and we're going to look at our image, our mirror image. And so, hopefully, you will be aware of this and see this and begin to unravel um, how you've been seduced and fooled by lawyers, how you, in many ways, have signed your name and put yourself into bondage. So let's continue. Our image, our mirror image. The mirror image is referred to in the public system as the straw man. If we read this is my point here. If we remember the movie The Wizard of Oz, there are many suggestions of what's going on here. You remember the robot, the robot, the Tin Man, I should say, the straw man, and the lion who didn't have any courage. That movie and the book was to reveal what was going on in the writings of that particular book, and then it was made as a movie. One thing that was missing in that movie was that Dorothy did not wear ruby shoes. She wore gold, silver. I think it's maybe silver. Yellow brick thing they walked on was gold, so her slippers were probably silver to indicate the value of not only gold but also in silver. But anyway, I've diverted on this, and let's just get back to where I was at. Um, this is what created. This is what is created by the registration or filing of an individual birth certificate. This is a necessary evil in that the government needed to provide for our needs by the creation of an industrial bond to provide the goods and services for our lives. This was done in a public form and it carries a public liability and must have an execution that is slash in parentheses death in order for it to be paid off in the public system. Should the individual accept this bond for value, it then loses its public liability as the individual has used his tax exemption to allow it to pass through him or her and not carry this public liability. When the public laws are passed, these laws are to regulate the industrial society and its commerce activities they affect. Public law, which has been done away with by the United States government bankruptcy, and thereby commerce, is regulated by public policy now. So this is the whole idea that takes place under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who they began to change this whole deal. No longer is dealing with what we call public law, but now it becomes a public policy. Okay. Whenever an infraction of a public policy occurs, it is charged against a straw man. And since most individuals are not aware of their straw man, they believe it is charged against them as an individual. They try to use public law, that is, arguments of facts, to deny these charges. When you accept these charges, there is no controversy, and you then become the holder in due course, and these charges become your private property, which cannot be regulated in the commerce zone. When you accept your birth certificate for the value, you then, the holder of the industrial bond, which it creates, is now held for both your benefit and the public. But the public liability is no longer attached to the bond or your straw man, which is now yours also. Two quotes from one from the past and one from the present. Okay, the first quote is from John Adams. I firmly of the opinion that there never was a paper pound, a paper dollar, or a paper promise of any kind that ever yet attained a general currency as money, but by force and fraud; that the army has been grossly cheated; that the creditors have been infamously defrauded, some closed their shops to prevent being paid off with worthless paper money, that the widows and fatherless have been oppressively wronged and beggared, that the gray hairs of their age and the innocence for want of their just dues have gone down with sorrow to their graves in consequences of our disgraceful, depreciated paper currency. This is based upon the Financial History of the United States, the 1896 edition. And then this is a quote from Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. The international organization intends purposes and activities include complete control of public finances, control, supervision, and audit of indigenous fiscal resources, budget practices, taxation, expenditures of public funds, currency issues, and banking agencies and affiliates. This, of course, complies with the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Research Technical Manual TM SW790S.1, which discloses a declaration of war upon the American people, to wit. This manual in itself, analogy, declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technical formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without the consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or group of persons and the public. It's based upon page 3. Consequently, in the interest of future world order, peace, and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public, with the ultimate objective of permanently shifting the nature and social energy, that is the wealth, of the undisciplined and irresponsible many into the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible, and worthy few, based upon page 7 of the book. And what he's saying simply is that we've been seduced. We were not told the rules of the game here, folks. So how can it be on equal ground? Okay, this is how the wealthy at that time, back in the 20s and 30s and beforehand, began to implement their plans to gradually have us to be responsible for their debts, when reality simply is that we never knew that. We were never told that. So we're now in the year 2022 here, folks, and they still don't bother to tell us, okay? It's also a reason why public education doesn't reveal these things. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the lower class elements of society must be brought under control. As an example, must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke and the long-term social duties from a very early age, where they have the opportunity to question the propriety of the matter. In order to achieve such conformity, the lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupancy orphan children. This is why when you sign as a mother, not knowing what you're signing, you actually give your children over to the state. Most never even read it. In fact, I doubt very few people have actually read it. The quality of education is given to the lower class, the poorest sort. The poorest sort, so that the mote of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initiative handicap, even bright lower class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. Does this sound like caste system to you guys? You know, the stuff that goes on in India, never have a chance to actually see and understand the truth. This was meant for all people, folks. That is what I'm talking about, Redemption Manual. Let's continue. This form of slavery is essential to maintaining some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. Of course, it is for them, naturally. That's been page 8 of Secret Weapons for Quiet Wars. March 9, 1933, the Senate document number 43, 73rd Congress, first session, Here's just what they say. The ownership of property is in the state. You hear that? Do you hear what that first statement is? It's to do with communist form of government, folks. Do you understand that? So continue. Do you understand this was a coup d'etat that took place at this time? This is the senators that did this. Okay. March 9th, 1933. Individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e., law amounting to mere user, and use must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. Repeated in hearing before a subcommittee of the Committee on Foreign Relations based upon February 17, 1950, page 494. Constitution for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, Treaty Document 97-19, and the Communist Manifesto. Yes, it's definitely the Communist Manifesto for sure, but it's also simply from the United Nations, who is the world government, folks. That's the world government. Okay? Continue. On March 6, 1933, the Conference of Governors pledged the faith and credit of the several states of the Union to the aid of the national government, and therefore, or thereafter, formed numerous socialist programs and committees, such as the Council of State Governments, that is the SSA, which is the Social Security Administration, etc., purportedly to deal with or accommodated the economic emergency operated under the Declaration of Interdependence on January 22nd, 1937, and published some of their activities in the Book of the States, Volume 2, page 144. Let's continue. On February 17, 1950, Senate hearings were held concerning the United Nations and its organizations. James P. Warburg testified on February 17, 1950. Now remember, this is Warburg. Trying to think his name now. Suddenly my mind just went blank. He is the one. This is not the same person. He is. What's happening simply is that Warburg is involved in the banking deal. Paul Warburg, back in the 1912 and 1913 in this country. So this apparently is one of his children. I'm guessing that, okay? Don't hold me to that. So here's his statement, very clearly. We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The question is only whether world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest. Pretty damning statement there, isn't it? Pretty straightforward, very clear. You're either going to do it by consent or by conquest. So much for a country where the people are free or independent, and with America being a sovereign nation, evidently the politicians have been lying to the American people for years. You betcha they have. You better believe they have. So next section is John Maynard Keyes. In 1920, by a continual process of inflation, government can confiscate. This is what I want you to point out what inflation is all about. It's about robbing you. This is happening all across the world, folks. Okay? By a continual process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of its citizens. There is no subtly nor surer means of overturning the existing basics of society than to debauch the currency. That's what's happening right now. Right now, in the last 2 years. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in such a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Well, folks, it's time for you to learn that and not be one man in a million. Continue from Federalist Paper number 79. In the general course of human nature, a power over a man's substance amounts to a power over his will. And we can never hope to see, realize, and practice the complete separation of the judicial from the legislative power. In any system which leaves the former dependent for pecuniary resources on the occasional grants grants of the latter. Continue. Law of conferences U.S. participation. Public Law 88-244, 77 Statute 775, HJ, House Joint Resolution number 778. Joint resolution to provide for participation by the government of the United States in the Hague Conference on Private International Law and an international/Rome Institute for the Unification of Private Law and authorizing appropriations therefore. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled that, here's the deal. The President is hereby authorized to accept membership for the government of the United States in, number one, the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and two, the International Rome Institute for the Unification of Private Law, and to appoint the United States delegates and their alternates to meetings of the two organizations and the committees and organs thereof. Section 2. There is authorized to be appropriate such sums as may be necessary, not to exceed $25,000 annually, for the payment by the United States of, number one, this propitiation share of the expenses of the Hague Conference on Private International Law and of the International Rome Institute for the Unification of Private Law. 2. And all other necessary expenses and instances to participate by the United States in the activities of the two organizations referred to in clause number 1 of this section, approved December 30th, 1963. Okay, here's what I want to talk to you about. I'm going to go into this because I've referred to this a couple of times already tonight. It's the HJR-192. This is the House Joint Resolution 192. This is based on June 5th, 1933. There's many things going on. All these things are going on there. As you see, during Franklin Roosevelt, he would declare a emergency and declared the country was bankrupt in a lot of ways and confiscated gold and all these type of things. So this is what it's about. So here we go. Because you need to hear this clearly. Okay? It's very important to know who your enemy is here in some ways, to understand what they've done to you. Okay? Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled that A, every provision contained in or made with respect to any obligation which purports to give the obligee a right to require payment in gold or a particular kind of coin or currency or any amount in money of the United States measured thereby is declared to be against public policy. So this is what happened here. No longer public law, it's now against public policy. This is a part of the coup. And no such provision shall be continued in or made with request to any obligations hereafter incurred. You hear that? Shall be convinced. And no such provision shall be contained in or made with respect to any obligation hereafter incurred. Every obligation heretofore or hereafter incurred, whether or not any such provision is contained therein or made with respect thereto, shall be discharged upon payment, dollar for dollar, in such coin or currency which at the time of payment is legal tender for public and private debts. Okay, let me explain what's going on here a little bit. Okay, what we're being told in the last year to two or even more is that in many countries this is already taking place. The digital dollar, it's not called a dollar in other countries, but I'm just referring to this here in America, the digital dollar. There are countries that do use that. I think Australia uses a dollar. I know the United States does. I don't know. I think Canadians also use the word dollar, but don't hold me to that. I may be wrong. So in order for them to be able to change this, they're going to have to change the law or their policy. Okay? Because what they're saying here is it's legal tender for public and private debts. Dollar for dollar. So in what I'm trying to point out simply is when these people come along here and they want to use digital currency, they've got to get rid of this. This is legal tender. And when you go to a grocery store, you go to any store that will not take dollars, you must make it very clear to them. Maybe you should take this with you. In exchange to them simply is, excuse me, got a little point here. This is legal tender for public and private debts. And you don't have any right not to take it. Okay? So we go on here. Money. So the following statements come from several different sources from Congress, Supreme Court cases, and the Federal Reserve. All stem from the passage of HJR-192. The Treasury writes up an interest-bearing bond for $1 billion. The Federal Reserve gives the Treasury a $1 billion credit for the bond and has created out of nothing a $1 billion debt, which the American people are obligated to pay with interest. This is based upon Money Facts, House Banking and Currency Committee, based upon 1964, page 9. So what's happened simply is they create credit from the bond, from the Treasury. So the Treasury writes up this deal, it's a bond. And this is not the way it used to be. This is after 1933. The Federal Reserve, which is not federal, it's not a reserve, and it's not a system. It's a group of private bankers. Gives the Treasury a $1 billion credit for the bond, and has created, so they have created out of nothing a $1 billion debt, which the American people are obligated to pay with interest. Okay? Continue. Debt is not paid by the giving of a note. This is from Nolan, N-O-L-A-N-D-C-O versus Maryland Casualty Company. A note is only a promise to pay and not payment. This is from a court decision based upon Fidelity Savings State Bank versus Grimes, 131 P. 2nd 894. Continue. Checks aren't money in themselves. That's right. Checks, that is your personal checking account, aren't money in themselves. This is from a quote from I Bet You Thought from the Federal Reserve Board of N, page 7. They, that is checks, are simply order forms instructing banks and other deposit institutions such as a savings bank and credit unions to move transaction balances which are money. Same as above. Banks don't keep cash in checking accounts and don't transfer currency or coin when acting on a check's instructions. This is from the same book on the Federal Reserve. They're telling you what they're doing here, okay? This is what you need to understand. The money, that is the Federal Reserve notes, will be worth 100 cents on the dollar because it is backed by the credit of the nation. It will represent a mortgage on all the homes and other properties of all the people in the nation. The money so issued will not have 1 penny of gold coverage behind it because it is really not needed. Wow, what a joke. That's from the 73rd Congress. This is before my lifetime, folks. This is almost 100 years ago. March 9th, 1933. So this is year 22, so we're talking about 11 years. So this is actually 89 years ago, a little over 89 years ago. Okay, we'll continue another quote. The giving of a Federal Reserve note does not constitute payment. See Elkhart, E-C-H-A-R-T, the commissioners of the CCA, 42 F, capital F, D, 2nd, 2D, 158. I'm giving you all this information so you can look this up on a law dictionary or look into case law, I should say. Okay. Next quote. The use of a Federal Reserve note is only a promise to pay. Again, this goes back to the court decision based upon See Fidelity Savings versus Grime 131P2D894. Continue. Now, legal tender, that is Federal Reserve notes, are not good and lawful money of the United States. Wow, something's going on here, isn't it? Let's look at this particular case law. It sees Rains, R-A-I-N-S, versus State 226S.W.189. Here's another question. Another quote, I should say. Federal Reserve notes are valueless. CIRS Code Section 1.1001-1, then in parentheses 4657, and from C.C.H. Continue. That Federal Reserve notes do not operate as payment in the absence of agreement that they shall constitute payment. This is based upon another case law, which is Blackshear Manufacturing Company versus Harrell, Harrell. This is based upon 12 S and Sam.E is an Edward 2D766. Now here's the crux of the matter here, folks. Continue on. The following is a bankruptcy case based upon Stanek, spelled S-T-A-N-E-K, versus White, Supreme Court of Minnesota, 1927. Chief Justice Wilson, the original debt was not paid. This discharge in bankruptcy operated as a bar to enforcement. The debt could be revived with a new promise, which in Minnesota must be in writing. The moral obligation involved in this original debt affords a sufficient consideration to suppose a new promise to pay the debt. Okay, so you're seeing what's happening here. Just continue to follow, okay? The moral obligation involved in the original debt affords a sufficient consideration to suppose a new promise to pay the debt. Liability rests upon the promise to pay, not on the original note. The discharge took the enforceability from the original note, which still evidence the moral obligation, and a new note revived the legal obligation. There is a distinction between a debt discharged and one paid. When discharged, the debt still exists, though divested of its characters of legal obligation during the consideration of the discharge. Something of the original vitality of the debt continues to exist, which may be transferred even though the transferee takes it subject to the disability incident to the discharge. The fact that it carries something which may be a consideration for a new promise to pay so as to make an otherwise worthless promise a legal obligation makes it the subject of transfer by assignment. Indeed, there is no reason why a transferee of such a note should not have the benefit of having the debt advanced to a condition of legal liability. And the last word says incredible. UCC, which is Universal Commercial Code, that's what this stands for, 3-419, instruments signed for accommodation. If an instrument is issued for value given for the benefit of a party to the instrument, that is the accommodated party, and another party to the instrument, accommodation party, one is in past tense, one is in present tense, signs the instrument for the purpose of incurring liability on the instrument without being a direct beneficiary of the value given for the instrument is signed by the accommodation party for accommodation. B, I should say letter B. Accommodation party may sign the instrument as maker, drawer, acceptor, or endorser, and subject to subsection D. Is obligated to pay the instrument in the capacity in which the accommodation party signs. The obligation of an accommodation party may be enforced notwithstanding any statutes of fraud or whether or not the accommodation party receives consideration for the accommodation. Let's continue on. Section C. A person signing an instrument is presumed to be an accommodation party. There is notice that the instrument is signed for accommodation if the signature is an anonymously endorsement or is accompanied accompanied by words indicating that the signer is acting as surety or guarantor with respect to the obligation of another party to the instrument, except as provided in UCC-3-605, comma. The obligation of an accommodation party to pay the instrument is not affected by the fact that the person enforcing the obligation had notice when the instrument was taken by that person that the accommodation party signed the instrument for accommodation. Section D. If the signature of a party to an instrument is accompanied by words indicating unambiguously that the party is guaranteed collection rather than payment of the obligation of another party to the instrument, the signer is obliged to pay the amount due on the instrument to a person entitled to enforce the instrument only if execution of the judgment against the other party has been returned unsatisfied. The other party is insolvent or in an insolvency proceedings. The other party cannot be served with process, or it is otherwise apparent that the payment cannot be attained from the other party. Section E. Accommodation party who pays the instrument is entitled to reimbursement from the accommodated party and is entitled to enforce the instrument against the accommodated party. The accommodated party who pays the instrument has no rights of recourse against and is not entitled to contributions from an accommodation party. So let's continue on here. This is from Uniform Commercial Code. Hold on a second. Uniform Commercial Code, Section 10-104, comma, laws not repealed. Section 1. The article on documents of title, that is Article 7, does not repeal or modify laws prescribing the form or contents of documents of title, or the services or facilities to be afforded by a bailee, or otherwise regulated bailee's business in respect not specifically dealt with herein, but the fact that such laws are violated does not affect the status of a document or title which otherwise complies with the definition of title. Section 1-201, as amended in 1962 and in 1994, version number 49. This was go on here. This is Section B. Next one below, number 1 here. As used in this resolution, the term obligation means an obligation including every obligation of and to the United States, except currency available in money of the United States. And the term coin or currency means coin or currency of the United States, including Federal Reserve notes and circulating notes of Federal Reserve banks and National Banking Association. Note, are you willing to commit a crime to PA, alleged debt, 27 CFR 72.11, Code of Federal Regulations. Meaning of terms. As used in this part, unless the context otherwise require, terms shall have the meaning inscribed in this section. Words in the plural form shall include the singular, and vice versa, and words importing the masculine gender shall include the feminine. The terms includes and including do not exclude things not enumerated which are in the same general class. Commercial Crimes, Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 27, Section 72.11. Meaning the following types of crime, that is federal or state, offenses against the revenue laws, burglary, counterfeiting, forgery, kidnapping, larceny, robbery, illegal sale of possessions of deadly weapons, prostitution, including soliciting, procuring, pandering, white slaving, keeping house or ill fame and like offense, extortion, swindling, and confidence games, and attempting to commit, conspiring to commit, or compounding any of the foregoing crimes Addiction to narcotic drugs and use of marijuana will be treated as if such were a commercial crimes. It says here, all crimes is commercial. What that means simply is they want the money. So this is what happens in a court system. All they're looking for is money. They're not looking for justice here. That's not what this is about. We look at it as all crimes is commercial. Because you're in the water world. You see, you're not on the land. You don't live on the land. They don't see that, you see. This is all taking back, way back. I think it's 1666, as I recall. Don't hold me to that. That's in Britain. When the London fire took place at that time, what they did was there was a subversion. While all that was going on, and all that kind of stuff was going on, something similar to what happened with 9/11, folks. It's the same thing. They do these subversions to do that. And what they did was simply is that they used the word persons, okay, which is a fiction. And they also did what I call, so what was taking place was that England was always involved in commerce here. This is what all of it's commerce, folks. That's what it is. That's what the law of the sea is about. It's not the law of land. And that's why we got to get back to the land, you see. So what was taking place was that there were men who had farms in England, Scotland, and all that areas of Britain, and they were involved in the Navy. And they needed, what was happening simply is they were gone, and there's a possibility of them being lost at sea or dying, that type of thing. So they had to have someone to take care of their trusts, their property. And they were given what they call 7 years in order to be found. And once that 7 years was, it didn't find them, then that would go to, in other words, their property would be given to whatever their family, or it would be given somewhere else. In other words, the court system would allow that. And reality simply is with that law, that particular deal act, it took what living on the land was a priority, and now was no longer the priority. It was now the law of the sea. You see, it's all about commerce. And again, it's what I'm trying to say is when they say commercial, that is commerce. You see, they want the money. So when a man is not able to pay for that particular thing in a court system, he is bonded and he's put in jail if he cannot pay the payment. Note, any action / complaint / transaction initiated by the state or / federal agents are commercial in nature, in light of the fact that they impose a quasi-monetary fine in violation of Article 1, Section 10, and Article 11, Section 1, and the U.S. bankruptcy. Let's continue. At the signing of the Coinage Act of July 23, 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson stated in his press release that when I have signed this bill before me, we will have made the first fundamental change in our coinage in 173 years. So this is, how many years is that? It's 57 years ago. The Coinage Act of 1965 succeeds the Act of 1792, and that act had the title, "An Act Establishing a Mint and Regulating the Coinage of the United States." Now, this is President Lyndon B. Johnson, now has signed this bill to make the first change in our coinage system since the 18th century. To those members of Congress who are here on this historic occasion, I want to assure you that in making this change from the 18th century, we have no idea of returning to it. You follow what's going on here, folks? Sort of a coup d'etat again here, isn't it? We have no idea of returning to it. We're not going back that way. See how this is gradually taking place already? The Coinage Act. Why would you need to change it? Because of what we're living in now, folks. It's all little by little gradually taking over. Same thing, the frog is in the water. Let's continue. The maximum in law. The money of the sovereign is his credit. He is the wealth for which no substance on earth can establish a value for. Let me explain this. Let me share one of the things kind of key. In Scripture, it says that God created man, and he came from the soil, came from dirt. He came from the land. He came from the land. Do you understand? He didn't come from the water. He came from the ground. That's what we're supposed to be living under, the law of the land. We're not living in the law of the land, folks. Okay? So the following is repeated, but I read it again and again and again. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. We repeated this earlier. This was done back in April 17, 1933. Do you understand that statement? This is not here. I'm asking you that question. Do you understand what they have done? It's a coup. A coup d'etat took place in April 1793 when the government says, we are the owners of the property, not you. They voided that. So individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e. law, amounting to mere user, and use must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. I read this before, but you need to get that in your head. You need to understand we're not living in Kansas anymore. The price of ignorance is far greater than the cost of an education. So I'm going to conclude with this because we're going to go in a different section. And I've been in here about 42 minutes, so my voice is starting to do its weird thing. We'll do what the next section will be deal with section 2, the informational articles of U.S. government, bankruptcy, Federal Reserve, etc., presenting a new history about it. So we'll do that. I don't know if I'll do that tonight. Well, I might do that if my voice feels good. This is 7 o'clock tonight. So anyway, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your attending this. I would like to hear back from others who have watched this. I do this because I have a concern for others. I don't get anything from this, folks, except telling the truth. That's what this is all about. Nothing else. Telling the truth. Because there's nothing else that's more important than truth out there. Nothing else. So anyway, I appreciate it again. You have a good evening and you take care. Take care.